My Sprinter camper van's not my daily driver, so by default it spends a lot of time sitting on the drive. I bought the AA solar charger because it gets a lot of good reviews. However, my focus is on whether it would deal with the Scottish West Coast propensity to rain for 75% of the time, and whether it would be of any use in the autumn, winter and spring months up here in Scotland. What you get in the box is the solar panel, which is in a robust plastic case and has a nice long cable with a foolproof connector, an LED indicator to confirm whether the volts are flowing, an OBD plug and a 12-volt cigar lighter plug, and a battery terminal connecting cable along with some screws and the manual. In a Sprinter, the battery is under the passenger side footwell. I didn't want to use the OBD socket for reasons I'll explain in another video. Fortunately, in the Sprinter, below the ignition operated standard cigar socket in the central console is an always live 12-volt socket that's rated to 25 amps. Anyway, I'm definitely not an expert on batteries, but based on reading around, these are the assumptions I'm using for my analysis and decisions on the solar charger. 12-volt lead-acid batteries of 6 cells, each able to hold between 2.12 and 2.2 volts, depending on who you listen to. This would mean that when it is 100% charged, the battery will show a voltage of between 12.72 and 12.8 volts. The closer you get to 100%, the harder it is to charge the battery, and the higher the amperage, the longer it takes. Figures for the state of charge of a lead-acid battery change depending on which source you look at, so I averaged out the state of charge numbers given in 3 separate sources. Based on these averages, at 12.71 volts the battery is at or near 100% charged. At 12.46 it's at 80%, at 12.12 volts at 50%, and at 11.59 volts it is 10% charged. I am assuming these are really only approximate values, but they act as an indicator for where the charging process is up to. I tested the van battery voltage in 3 different scenarios every day for a week each. Firstly, to get a baseline when the charger was not attached. Then, as I wanted to emulate classic Scottish autumn to spring daylight, despite it being in the middle of the summer, I pointed the van towards the north and in a spot which didn't get any direct sunlight. And finally, I turned the van to face south, such that the solar panel was in direct sunlight from about 9:30 in the morning to 4 in the afternoon. However, at this time of the year there are at least 16 daylight hours and the sun is actually up in the sky. By the winter solstice, the daylight hours here drop to around 7.5 hours and the sun can only be seen tracking the horizon. Here's the results and the conclusions. In the no direct sunlight winter emulation scenario facing north, the solar charger delivers around 0.81 volts in a 30-day month, assuming around 16 hours of daylight. So it takes the charger 0.34 divided by 0.81 times 16 hours to deliver the 0.34 volts, which would maintain the battery at a voltage with zero net gain or loss, so that's 6.72 hours. However, if I assume that because the sun spends most of the winter on the horizon and that the charger is only half as effective, then it would take over 13 hours a day to simply maintain the battery voltage. So here in Scotland, that means that despite the solar charger being connected, the battery would still lose voltage from September to April. In the bright sky facing south scenario, it takes the charger 16 daylight hours to deliver 1.07 volts. So to maintain the battery at zero loss or gain would be 0.34 divided by 1.07 times 16 hours, which is around 5.1 hours. Assuming the 50% efficiency with a low sun as before, that means the van battery loses charge between October and March. Unfortunately, the bright sky scenario is never going to happen up here for any longer than a couple of days a month over the extended winter period. And then of course there are the added problems of the van being covered in snow and the windows being iced up for long periods. Hey ho, now it's time to go and buy a mains trickle charger before the autumn arrives. It's all good.